Started. So our presentation is recorded. And then let me just get us on Facebook. Okay. Okay, everyone, welcome to the Poudre River Fest. Today is our Wildlife Day, and our presentation is Wildlife Along the Poudre River. So before we get started, just want to give everybody kind of an understanding of who the Poudre River Fest is. It is a one-day festival typically, but this year we are going all out and we are hybrid. So we have 4 days of programming for you. Today is the first day with our focus on wildlife. And then we also will have 3 more days of programming ending on August 21st, where we will have an in-person celebration at New Belgium Brewery. But these are the organizations that put on the Poudre River Fest. The festival is about education, but it's also about restoration. So proceeds from the Poudre River Fest go to support restoration projects on the Cache-la-Poudre River. So if you are interested and able to donate, please visit poudreriverfest.org. So I am going to turn it over now to Tallon. He is going to give us this great presentation today.
Yes, let me begin sharing my screen and I'll kind of introduce myself. There we go. Yeah, so I'm really happy to be here. This is our second year attending Poudre River Fest for Northern Colorado Wildlife Center. And what Northern Colorado Wildlife Center is a local nonprofit here in Fort Collins. We serve Larimer and Weld County alike, but we are based out of Fort Collins. And we do a lot of environmental education, a lot of stuff just like this, maybe going to schools and other things. But we also do some wildlife rescue and rehabilitation work as well. And we take care of our animals out of a private residence in Loveland right now, while we search for some land suitable to expand into birds and mammals, which is kind of the other downside right now is we can only do reptiles and amphibians for extended care. At times we can offer emergency medical services and some rescue services to birds and mammals still. But again, that's just kind of based on what our resources are. Right now, I'm our only staff member. I'm double as one of our licensed wildlife rehabilitators, but also our director, and do some grant writing and fundraising there too. So I've been around in the area for my whole life. I was born in Loveland, grew up in Fort Collins. And then I've been in the wildlife rehab field for about 20 years now as well. I started when I was about 5 years old at Wildkind, which was a program that used to be part of the Humane Society here in Larimer County. And my dad was the director of it. I would just go in with him after school, kind of learn some stuff, clean empty cages. And then as I got older and smarter, I was able to do a little bit more. And then when I turned 18, I got my license. And yeah, 5 years ago, I started Poudre River, sorry, my apologies, Northern Colorado Wildlife Center, because Wildkind had closed back in 2012. So we're just kind of trying to bring back those rehabilitation services that our community lost. But today I'm happy to take a break from that and to talk about some education stuff to go along with Poudre River Fest. I want to talk about the different habitats that surround the river and the different wildlife that can be found in those habitats, kind of on a broader scale. I am only licensed in birds, mammals, reptiles, and amphibians, so I really won't talk too much about fish or insects just because I don't want to tell you something wrong. But that's okay because there's plenty of other animals that can be found there. And we're going to kind of talk about them on kind of a wildlife rehabilitator's scale and how we look at these different habitats and our different thought processes, right? So we have Colorado Parks and Wildlife that's here. That's who I'm licensed through. But they focus much more on the management and the law enforcement side of that, right? We're just a nonprofit. We're really here on an individual basis to see how can we help each individual animal. Maybe they get involved in some kind of emergency, whether it's human caused or natural. And we'll kind of talk about some of that stuff too, of what I've seen in the past and what you can do to kind of help prevent animals from being injured in these various habitats. And so when we look at this breakdown, we can look at the Poudre River as kind of three sections of broad scale habitats, right? So we have the mountainous section, which extends far past even Gateway Mountain Park on this map up near Cameron Pass where the headwaters are. And it'll flow through Fort Collins into this urban area, through Windsor a little bit too, and then through Greeley. We kind of have those urban habitats, but we also have rural habitats in between that. And each species is going to use each habitat very differently. And so that's kind of what we're going to look at to begin. We're going to begin with mountainous river habitats. And generally speaking, we typically see larger animals in the mountains in these river corridors up there. So moose and deer and bear and stuff like that. Not that we don't have little guys, but typically we're going to see larger animals because they can withstand the conditions, right? It's just naturally a little bit harsher up there. Even now, while it's getting warm down here, it can still be pretty cold up there, especially at night. And so you need to be a little bit larger, like this moose up top, to withstand some of those freezing conditions there. But like I said, we do have some little guys, and we do have the endangered boreal toad there that's in the middle. So those are one of the very few amphibian species in Colorado anyway, but also one of the only ones that can be found at elevations that high. And these guys are just about as high as you can get in Colorado because they are near the Cameron Pass, the headwaters there. And they are endangered, very deep into those poor waters there because of a something called citrate fungus. And essentially what that is it's extremely contagious, and it kind of messes with their skin and causes it to inflame. And because amphibians respirate through their skin as well, right? They have kind of a reduced diaphragm, so they need to use that osmosis diffusion through their skin for oxygen. That inflammation will swell it and kind of, you can think of it as almost pores, that swelling is going to constrict those pores. And essentially it kind of chokes the amphibian from the outside, right? Which is an odd predicament to be in. But luckily, Colorado Parks and Wildlife and the National Park Service have really stepped up reintroduction efforts, breeding programs. Even here in Bellevue, just outside of Fort Collins, they have a research hatchery there that they will bring these tadpoles down to kind of just let them grow until they're just about to metamorphosize into the actual toad, and then they'll release them there. These guys are unique in the fact that they don't, a lot of people think that these guys hibernate and that they just fall asleep for the whole winter, and then they just wake up when it's warm, right? Well, it's not quite that easy. They have adapted to the rocky soils that live in the mountains, and so they'll go into crevices, they'll go into tunnels, sometimes even beaver dams. They'll go in there during the cold months, and they will kind of just hang out there and just kind of stay out of the elements. But they have been seen sunning on the cold days in the wintertime, and so it's not a just comatose kind of state, right? They're lowering their systems and then increasing them to conserve and use energy as they see appropriate. River otters are also up in these river ecosystems in the mountains. They are extremely rare. In 2003, they were downgraded from endangered to just threatened now. But they're really cute when you do see them. They're very playful. In the winter times, especially, we see this a lot in Yellowstone because everybody has their cameras up there, but they'll actually slide down the snowbanks there, and maybe 30, 40, 50 feet, and they'll just kind of make loops and enjoy their little snow slide in there. But they are top predators, and even though they are super adorable, I promise that they are also highly aggressive. And so that's why if you do find any of these animals injured, right, you should always contact either Colorado Parks and Wildlife or your local wildlife rehabilitator. Because let's say you come across an otter that's been hit by a car in the canyon, and that's fine, but you could go try pick it up, but then they have this revitalization of energy, and they bite you with their extremely sharp crustacean breaking teeth, and then we have all kinds of other issues that we have to worry about, right? But if you can just call a wildlife rehabilitator, I can come up there with either nets or big gloves that go all the way to my wrist that are anti-bite or preventative to bites. and we can get him help that way too. Because if you get bit by any mammal in Colorado, there's going to be a high chance that the state is going to require me to euthanize it for rabies testing, even though rabies is extremely rare within our wildlife populations. So when we look at how we can protect mountain habitats and some of the stuff that we can do, that, you know, the free, easy, everyday kind of household changes is what I try to offer people, because everybody's in a different state financially and with the time allotment. And so when you're in the mountains, you can drive carefully. You know, that's really easy and free to do. The problem is that when you don't and you overturn, right? So about 10 years ago, we had a tanker truck overturned into the Poudre River that was in the canyon, and they were carrying oil. And so obviously, I think everybody is pretty familiar with the damages that oil spills can cause to wildlife, and that's no different whether it's the BP oil spill in the Gulf or in an ocean or in our local river, right? Because not only it's just not a light switch you can turn off and on, right? You have to call 911. They have to not only get first responders there, but they have to get their hazmat team there, and they have to get their maybe their EPA equipment to protect that water, right? So that oil is going to run far downstream before anybody's getting ahead of this problem and solving it. And so animals are becoming coated in oil. You have your insects and other your prey items that are dying, right? Fish don't stand a chance in oil water. And so you can really have some really significant ripple effects from crashing your car. Even if it's not oil, you know, gasoline is not great either, obviously. But also in this picture, you can see this car that overturned, its trunk opened up. So now you're introducing all of the contents from your car into that water as well, right? So you're just dumping a bunch of litter in there, especially now with masks and other things that are looped or netted or easy for animals to get caught in. That seems to be the most dangerous litter for them. So just drive safely. Don't take those curves too fast. The other thing we're probably going to see this year, unfortunately, is the wildfire impact. I know a lot of first responder agencies are getting ready for flooding season. I'm getting my team ready for the injuries that we see from post-fire impacted ecosystems. So in this picture, she's showing the ashy mud and silt that comes out of it. That will clog a lot of fish gills. And I'm not really here to talk about fish too much, but that is a problem because it affects every other animal that I do care for, right? And can take care of. And so like with the High Park fire, when that happened up near the mouth of the canyon, I picked up a Western trustable garter snake that was, they're a semi-aquatic garter snake that we have here, and he was eating a little minnow. The problem was that minnow's entire system, gills, stomach, and everything else was filled with ash. And so he was almost kind of choking on that because now you don't have that smooth fish to get down your throat, even when they're unhooking their jaws, right? So that can cause some choking and issues there, not just, again, for the fish, but even beavers and things like that, they rely on their oil on their fur, same as birds with their waterproofing, right? Because they have to be able to get dry quick and keep some of the water off of them. But this ash and silt, just like the oil and gasoline above, can strip them from that waterproofing, and then they'll just sink and drown. And we don't want to see that either. The other thing I threw in here about the ecosystems, which I sometimes get pushback on, is stacking rocks. And so that's a little bit dangerous to animals because, well, it's dangerous to animals and people. Let me start with the people side. So stacking rocks originated because it was kind of a navigation thing, right? So people would stack rocks along the trail so you don't get lost. You can just, if the trail's not clear, you can at least follow the stacked rocks out back home. They have become increasingly artistic and increasingly recreational to use. So one, you can throw off lost hikers if they're still trying to follow that system. But the other thing is that you can see it kind of changes the entire dynamic of the water. And the fish species that we do have in the Poudre River are typically not agile in the vertical form and can't really jump over those rock dams that you just installed. And maybe that's preventing them from spawning areas. And that's going to affect every heron or raccoon or fox or whatever it is downstream or upstream, depending on where that fish is trying to go, right? Because they're not going to be able to get to their spawning areas, which provide a ton of food for the surrounding wildlife community. The other issue with these rocks is you can see how it kind of diverts the flow in different directions. Well, if you divert it into the shoreline, you could be drowning animals that are burrowing in those shore pockets, right? And you're just increasing to erosion, you're increasing the sediment that's in the water. And again, it's just, that's why I don't recommend this. That's why I don't agree with it. I'll knock them down if I see them, because they are, a small force that is really having a big impact on a larger ecosystem. And again, I know everybody thinks, oh, it's just me doing it, or it's just me and my girlfriend or whatever. But there's a ton of people with that exact same mentality. And so you can track the whole area of the river and the mountains and really see a lot of miniature dams that are just throwing it all for a loop, right? The easiest way we can keep freshwater healthy is just by letting these rivers flow. And by making the river healthy, you're going to start a domino effect that's going to keep the surrounding wildlife healthy and happy. So when you get out of Bellevue, LaPorte area, we kind of drop down into the Fort Collins section of the Poudre River, and Fort Collins has been, in my opinion, really great over the last 50 to 60 years at protecting the river corridor within town and establishing natural areas and open spaces on either side of it, so that we can really protect it, keep it a solid migration route for animals to get through town without having too many wildlife conflicts, because the urban section of rivers is going to be the number one place for human wildlife conflicts. And luckily, there's always humane solutions that are not lethal or not going to hurt you, not going to hurt the animal, that we can instill. And that's why we're here, right? You can always reach out to us. We don't charge for any of our services. So if you are having a problem with an animal, reach out to us. We can, I'm sure in the 50 years of experience we have on our team, that we can come up with a solution for you. But to get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty details of some of these species here, we do have belted kingfishers. They are really pretty birds. You'll see them along the, like in Riverbend Natural Area, Arapahoe Bend. There's quite a few, but they do have really small territories. They only live on the shores of rivers. They're actually cavity nesting birds, so they don't have nests in the trees. They burrow into the burrows already established on the shorelines. And so they only have about 100 yards of territory along those shorelines that they really patrol and fish in and protect. And so if you see one there and you return to that naturally, you're probably going to see the same one over and over again. But they are really fun birds to watch. They can dive, they can skim and catch fish. But they are really fragile birds as well. And so we see them caught in fishing line and hit by car a lot, attacked by people's outdoor cats that are unsupervised. And, we do everything we can for them. For us right now, because we don't have a facility for birds, the most we can do is stabilize and then transport them to an out-of-county facility. And, every facility is going to have different resources. So maybe I get this bird that has a fracture that I can fix, but somebody else can't, right? And so he still has to get euthanized. So hopefully we can get an area established to help birds and mammals up here too, so that these guys don't have to wait to get don't have to wait as long to get help, I should say. But they are very beautiful birds that are around here. Raccoons, I'm sure we are all familiar with raccoons and them within our neighborhoods. They are super smart, super adaptable animals. A ton of different vocalizations that come off of these guys, but they do really love their riparian habitats and their flowing water. They'll take on lakes and stuff too, but with rivers, they are generally more shallow. And so for the short raccoon, they can go further into the water when they're looking for crayfish or other crustaceans or whatever that is, right? The other nice thing that we typically see in the urban sections of the river are wetlands and marshes that are on the sides of them. And raccoons really love those habitats too, because they bring salamanders that they can eat, and they also bring the red-winged blackbirds that nest there. And while red-winged blackbirds are excellent defenders of the nest, raccoons will take them on just to get their eggs. So we see a lot of raccoons. Raccoons are probably also one of the most common species that have a conflict with, whether it's uh, trash cans getting knocked over, or them going through your dog doors to eat your cat food and dog food, or just little things like that, getting in chimneys and stuff like that. But again, you could lock your dog doors, you can lock your trash cans, you can cap your chimney. Um, there's even mammal repellents that are sold at like Home Depot and Lowe's that are fairly inexpensive. And they come in granules and sprays. You can even put, like, if the raccoon's getting in your garden and eating your vegetables, you can just put those granules in that garden and it'll keep all the mammals away. You do have to reapply it if it rains or snows, and it will keep your pets away. So don't just blanket your entire backyard, because then your dog won't want to go out there to go to the bathroom, right? But select areas, or if you're trying to protect a certain tree or something like that, mammal repellents can really go a long way. But if you do live near water, whether it's a river or a ditch, you're likely going to have animals there, right? We're all attracted to water. Um, in the Poudre River, in the urban Poudre River sections too, is kind of when we start seeing more diversity in the reptiles and amphibians, like this common snapping turtle at the bottom here of the slide. We don't have alligator snapping turtles in Colorado, but we do have plenty of these common snapping turtles. They get fairly large. This is full grown, probably about 2.5 feet from head to tail. With the, I don't know if any of you guys have been to the new Whitewater Park that is in Fort Collins, kind of up there by, was that College and Cherry, College and Vine area. But they, the first year they opened that, I think I've been back for snapping turtles every time. People just, it's not that they're injured and people are not trying to hurt them. They just don't know we have snapping turtles around, right? And so they think it's somebody's pet that got out or something like that. But when we put that in, we purposefully kind of channelized the river and influenced it to have pools and rapids and other things like that. And that's perfect for a snapping turtle, right? Because he can sit there in the calm section of it and then just wait for all the fish and frogs or toads or salamanders or whatever, ducks, whatever he's hungry for that day, to just go by, right? And so again, it was just a trade-off when they decided to put that in there. We had to expect, by drawing more people to that river in that area, that we were going to have more human-wildlife conflict, right? But luckily, with snapping turtles, none of these animals are out to get you. They're honestly, humans are the #1 predator to wildlife, and they all know that too. So they don't want to have anything to do with us the same way many people don't want to have stuff to do with them. So you can just kind of coexist by just going to a different part of the park or something like that. We are, this time of year especially, seeing a lot of turtles on the move crossing roads. That's because they are looking for mates, or they're getting out competed by last year's offspring that are getting bigger and eating more of the fish around. So if you ever do see a turtle crossing the road, what the important thing to do is just to kind of hold it like a sandwich, and not by the tail, because you can, their vertebrae run through their tail, so you can break their back by holding them wrong on the tail. And you just hold them kind of in their midline, halfway down their shell, maybe on a snapping turtle, a little bit more towards the back, because they can snap their head back about halfway through their shell. But yeah, other than that, you just you pick him up, you move him to the side that he was already going, right? He has business on that side. So you want to move him over there. If you just put him on the side he came from, once you leave, he's just going to try again. So put him on the other side and then just kind of let him go. He will thank you in some sort of way, I'm sure, even if he doesn't say it. But they are really cool animals. And we do have the painted turtles around here too. And we also have the Western box turtles, which are not a turtle at all, they're a tortoise. So I always tell people, if you don't know, don't put the turtle in water, right? You can put it next to water, or you can just put it on the other side of the road, but don't go throwing the turtle in water, because if it's tortoise, you're just going to drown it, right? So we don't want to do that. We also have the red-eared sliders in Colorado. They are highly invasive. So what we do with that, because what they'll do is they'll outcompete any native turtle population there, right? And so when we get a red-eared slider, and let's say it has a fishing hook in its mouth, or maybe it did get hit by a car or a bike or something like that, we will care for it. We will give it all the same resources and professional care and everything else that we would anybody else. But after that, we transfer it to the Northern Colorado Herpetological Society, and then they'll help adopt it out for us. And that way, that animal still doesn't have to be euthanized, but doesn't go back into the ecosystem to cause damage either, right? So when we look at the urban habitats, it's fairly simple when we look at helping them. Like I said, the city of Fort Collins has been really great about how they've restored the natural river corridor. But you can still help out by doing things like picking up litter. I know I mentioned masks before. That has become an issue this last year, as people are discarding and littering those too, and the loops just are getting wrapped around animals. Fishing line, last year, out of about 250 calls for service that we answered, about 40% of those were fishing line related injuries. So a lot of pelicans, herons, gulls, ducks, geese, turtles, stuff like that. So yeah, just picking up litter. We also have seen how cans and discarded birdhouses and bottles and stuff can also get stuck on animals' heads, particularly skunks. Again, if you ever do find an animal that is wrapped up and stuck somewhere, you can give us a call. We can see if we have somebody available. Otherwise, we might have some other resource to be able to help you out with. We also start to see more insecticide and pesticide use when we go into the urban corridor. And, that's really easy too. Again, it's just kind of being conscientious. If you are going to use those, again, there's eco-friendly solutions out there. You can go for that. But also just kind of be conscientious and leaving a buffer zone between where you're spraying and where that water is, right? Because you have to also consider that when it rains, that water that's going to run off into that area, right? There's also ditches and little troughs that you can make kind of on your property along that Poudre River side. And then again, that way when that runoff happens, it's caught in that trough and it doesn't go into the river, right? But again, you can just not use them, and that would help out as well. Feeding wildlife, we see this in the urban centers of any urban center. That's where people are wanting to feed the wildlife. And of course, typically when you think of the river, we look at ducks and geese are typically the animals that are coming up that are getting habituated enough to trust people to feed them. And when we see that, we see people do things like bread and French fries or whatever junk food they've decided to have for that day. They want to share it with the animal. Junk food has bad enough repercussions on our health, has exponentially worse repercussions on waterfowl, especially, and other wild animals. And so, for example, like bread, we see, if you've ever heard of angel wing or if you've seen geese that are out in the wild, you can go to City Park in Fort Collins. I just saw 2 yesterday where their wings are kind of jutted up. They're not laying flat against their body. They're kind of stuck upright. That's because of the poor nutrition that's been provided from all the junk food, the excess, whether it's excessive protein or excessive carbs. There's all kinds of other damages to it. And even if it's not the angel wing, right? Because these animals, once that happens, they can never fly again, which is why we see them at City Park, because they have nowhere else to go now. But we can also see a lot of GI issues with some of this food that people introduce into the ecosystem. And so that can either choke them or clog them. And then, that can also be lethal to them. So again, a lot of municipalities have ordinances against feeding wildlife at all. If that is the case, I would recommend not doing it. Again, for example, City Park, it is illegal to feed animals there. People still do it. But you can also do nice things and healthy things for these animals if it is allowed, and that's something you want to do. So you can cut up grapes like in half or in quarters and give them to them. Organic oats and stuff like that are helpful. But I really wouldn't push it past cut up grapes or oats. Again, though, Northern Colorado Wildlife Center doesn't recommend feeding any wildlife. Because the other thing I have to deal with sometimes is the people that come behind you and don't feed that animal. They will, the animal kind of take offense to it and then get aggressive towards that person because they're not feeding them. And that's what they've come to expect and learn from everybody else that is. So it's not that animal's fault. And there's not, the animal is not going to do significant bodily harm or any harm to you. But we don't go to the parks to get chased by ducks, or at least I don't. And so it's better if we just let them be wild and we just do our recreation. Again, kind of coming back to this coexistence piece where we can just all enjoy the same natural area and all stay just as healthy from it. So then we move from the rural area, or from the urban area, my apologies, into the rural area. If you haven't been to the confluence of the Poudre River with the South Platte, just east of Greeley, I would recommend it. I think it's really beautiful. I always love to see the two tones of water when they meet. But the rural side of stuff too, because you're getting on more flatlands, can bring a whole different kind of ecosystem to the wildlife that's around there. And because of that, we see very different animals. So for example, the Spanish softshell turtle up there is one of the more unique looking turtle species we have in this area. They're relatively rare. I've seen them in Fort Collins too, in the ponds. They typically like more calmer sediment, kind of cloudy water, I should say. Um, Not a lot of animals enjoy the fast flowing rapids or fast flowing water at all, but these guys especially don't. And you can see they're called soft shell turtles. You can see it's kind of a rubbery shell almost. It's still protection, but they don't have that hard cast that we see in like snapping turtles and painted turtles, or even the Western box turtle that's around here. They do, you probably won't see these guys much more outside of Fort Collins just because they do enjoy their lower elevation habitats. But with them, you will probably see salamanders. So a lot of people don't realize we have salamanders in Colorado. The only species we have is the tiger salamander pictured there. They're one of our more common species that we get into the rehab side of our nonprofit. And they get stuck in window wells or attacked by cats, or like on Halloween last year, we picked up one that a snowplow had taken out its den and kind of upturned that soil. And so we can get them from that or construction sites too. But regardless, they are the only salamander we have here, and they are relatively fragile. So all amphibians, just like the boreal toads that we talked about, do kind of do a significant amount of respiration through their skin in a simple term. And so when you do handle these guys, let's say it is a healthy salamander that just happened to fall in your window well, it's not injured, it's not lethargic or dehydrated or emaciated or anything. I would just recommend either putting on gloves and wetting them, or just wet your hands and pick them up and then put them somewhere safe and then wash your hands, right? Don't touch your face or anything. While there's not, again, diseases and parasites are very rare within wildlife populations. Kind of the same thing with COVID in humans, right? Like we talk to animals, they probably think we were diseased, but we'd be like, no, it's not that bad. There's not all of us, just enough of us, right? And so same kind of thing. It's enough to be precautious about and take precautions against, I should say. So yeah, just wash your hands after touching a salamander or any other animal. But they do really love earthworms. Again, too, it's worth noting that Colorado Parks and Wildlife does allow for you to take, I want to say up to, between 4 and 6 wild caught salamanders from the wild. They keep as pets. People do that. I, again, recommend against it just because we have this kind of a guiding philosophy that animals should stay in the wild when appropriate and when they're not in danger or not injured or sick or orphaned, because that's really where they want to be, right? Same thing with us. I wouldn't want anybody picking me up to just put me into an aquarium for the rest of my life, right? I would want to be able to have my freedoms. And so we ask that, you just keep that in mind too when we're interacting with animals. So the muskrat too, we can see it's a semi-aquatic mammal. A lot of people don't know that muskrats are omnivorous, and so they'll eat the fish and the frogs too. And a lot of people tend to get these guys mixed up with beaver. And if you ever see them side by side, it will instantly make sense why they are not the same species. Muskrat are probably about a fifth of the size of a beaver, and they have a long skinny tail versus a beaver, who we all know have very long flat tails that they use to help build their dams and protect themselves there. But there's muskrats, and muskrats can be found in the urban centers too, but they thrive more, I should say, in the calmer, flatter lands that we have out on the plains. So when we look at protecting these animals, there's a little bit more challenge here because the damages and the dangers that come to rural river systems are caused by agriculture on a large scale or base, right? So um, on a again on a larger scale base, when you're how we just talked about preventing insecticides and pesticides from going into the urban waters, we need to mitigate the runoff from the farms as well, because those are just going to include again more harmful chemicals, or that runoff is just going to collect silt and bring it into the water, cloud up the water, clog up gills and other respiratory systems. And so it's really better if that silt can just stay in the field where it's going to help plants grow instead. So we see a lot of farmers that are responsible put their irrigation ditches on again the side of the property, and then they can have, as long as they work the water rights laws correctly, they can pull from that water to fill those ditches to then water their crops. And it's kind of puts a nice checks and balances system there to not allow all that runoff to go right in, right? And I think we all probably have heard about back when DEET was a really big thing with agriculture, and all the damages that caused to human and wildlife health, right? I mean, DEET will deteriorate plastic, and so definitely not something that we need animals running around in or trying to survive in. While I do have several ways I can treat poisoned animals, it kind of depends on how far gone they are and if they're an organ failure or if they're hemorrhaging from their eyes and nose and stuff because of a certain kind of poison. We don't want to do that either. And the other thing to keep in mind too is that those poisons are going to um, infect the entire food web, right? So that fish that's swimming in whatever that nasty chemical is that ultimately dies and washes ashore, maybe there's an owl, or not an owl, but a hawk, or maybe even a vulture, another kind of scavenger, fox or something that comes and eats that. They're going to ingest that same poison, die, and it's just this domino effect all the way through the food chain, right? That is affecting consumers and producers, and then ultimately scavengers and everything else. And so, just a little bit of poison can really kill a lot of our community's wildlife. And so, it's better to just not use that. Again, there's humane solutions for all that stuff, even inside. If you have rodents and mice inside your house, there's humane solutions to get them out of there that don't involve any lethal options. The river corridor planning as well. Like I said, I don't know a ton about Greeley's plan, so I can't speak to that. I know Fort Collins has been very conscientious about how they've managed their river system to keep it a nice kind of river, or not, it is to keep it a nice ribbon, I should say, going through the city versus just a straight canal. Because again, the fast water really deters animals from recreating or surviving on it, but also it usually tends to bring very steep banks, and so animals can't even get to the water, or like the kingfishers and some of the salamanders and snakes and some of the other animals that we talked about that rely on the shorelines for their burrows, they automatically lose that habitat, right? And then they have to leave somewhere else, and hopefully there's somewhere else to go, right? Because if there's not, then it's probably not going to be a great ending for them. But again, and it's always really beneficial to your community members as well, and to the morale of everybody around to keep a naturalistic, wildlife safe river corridor too. Because like I mentioned at the beginning too, these corridors are how these animals, or a vast majority of them, are moving through our cities, right? Or even right now we're in migration season, right? Fort Collins is, or northern Colorado, I should say, is within the flyway that brings in a ton of migratory species this time of year. And so they're relying on all this river and this riparian habitats, these wetlands, these marshes, to kind of be able to take a break during migration and recoup their energy, fill their bellies, and then get on to the next leg, right? Especially, let's say it's somebody that's going from Mexico up to the Arctic or something like that. We would like pit stops we want to make sure they have pit stops as well to get them through. Livestock's time in the river too. Yeah, it's, you know, it kind of relates back to the farm runoff where you're just, you're throwing off that natural balance, right? Rivers, while they can take a pretty big beating and they can bounce back relatively quickly, when we introduce constant stress on them, that's when problems start arising. And so a herd of cows that lives every day within a river or crosses a river multiple times a day, especially on the hot days, right? I don't blame them for taking a bath, but they will urinate and defecate in that water, which will throw off the nitrogen levels and everything else, the pH levels. You can see them, kind of stampede enough to where they're really increasing the width of a certain section of river, which can create, pools on the side of it that will attract mosquitoes or other pests that you might not want on your property there. But yeah, so installing fencing along the river can kind of help keep them out. I've seen other, I guess, agricultural techniques where they will kind of bring a little miniature aquifer to a trough, and they can, maybe it has a pump and they can still fill the trough off of the river water, but you're keeping those cows away from that river to the point where they cannot cause excess damage, right? Which again is a great humane solution. Everybody's happy. The cows still get to enjoy their water, and all the native wildlife that live in that river can also enjoy their lives as well. We do see it a little bit sometimes. For NOCO, we don't do any kind of body recovery or roadkill pickup or anything like that. But we will see it sometimes where livestock or large ungulates will die within a river. And if we have the time, we'll pull the body out of the river just so it's not, again, negatively affecting any downstream health, because that is natural. People, or not people, but animals are going to die in the water. But again, we're kind of in this place as a species where humans really need to go above and beyond to take some of these stressors away from the river, right, and help it recover and stay healthy, because there's enough against it. So that's another kind of reason why I suggest that livestock don't enter the river too often, is because it is dangerous for them. They slip and they could break an ankle, or if they die, then it's going to negatively impact downstream health as well, especially if it becomes in excessive amounts. So yeah, great. So that was great. That was a really quick introduction to kind of how a wildlife rehabilitator will look at the river ecosystem and some of the interactions I've had with it. If you have a question and want to throw it in the chat, I will look at that now. Perfect, yeah. So it doesn't look like we have any questions. I do have it pulled up if anybody wants to put it in. Otherwise, I really appreciate you guys taking the time to hang out with me and watch this presentation. It is nice that, again, we are not so much involved in the management side of any of this. We can take a little bit more individual approach and actually look at some of these different animals and how we can all do our part to help them. It definitely attracts all kinds of animals. In fact, actually, after this presentation, I'm going to get off and I need to go up to Lee Martinez Park to check on a heron that was reported as missing half of its beak. So we will see if there's any help that he needs, or if it's an old injury that he can live with, then that's okay too. So I got a question about snakes. Yeah, so I didn't go into snakes too much. And there's the question of how to avoid them. So that's a really good question. The most important thing to keep in mind is that the only venomous snake that we have in northern Colorado is the prairie rattlesnake. They're pretty distinctive. Sometimes they can lose their rattle through trauma injuries, or people are trying to hurt them. But other than that, you're going to see that square head. You're going to see that kind of greenish markings. But to be ultra safe, you could just stay away from all the snakes that you see. Mostly it's going to be the garter snakes that you see around the rivers. The garter snakes and the bull snakes tend to be the most common that I get calls about. You can avoid them. You know, they're going to be looking for rocks to sun on or rocks to hide under if it's too hot. That's where they're also going to hunt when they look for their prey. Like I said, like garter snakes, um, they're mostly eating like grasshoppers and mice and worms and stuff like that. Bull snakes are going to maybe eat, you know, they really love their eggs. They'll also eat some small rodents as well. So it's not, they're not dangerous to you by any means. You know, if you ate their excrement, you might get salmonella, but that's the only real avenue of danger that you have there, right? So again, just wash your hands after you work with an animal. Um, but other than that, you know, I just talked to somebody yesterday. I think the other misconception about snakes that's out there too is they all have very big teeth. Majority of the time when I get bit by a snake, a garter snake or a bull snake, it doesn't even break the skin on me. I just picked up a 6-foot bull snake yesterday that was in the middle of a dog park in West Fort Collins. And, you know, he didn't have, like I said, he was in all kinds of danger and he still let me pick him up. He didn't even try to strike or bite or anything like that. They are relatively docile animals. And the biggest thing that you're probably going to get spooked by is when they run away. You're probably not going to see them until they run, and they're going to be going in the opposite direction. So as long as you don't go in that direction, I would suspect you're probably going to be just fine. I think the only other snake that I've ever heard of a human wildlife conflict arising from is the northern water snakes that are more on the rural side of stuff. They like culverts and drainages too. Um, they are semi-aquatic and they love to eat fish. And so the problem arises when I'll have anglers call me that they're reeling in a fish, and then they reel it in and there's a snake attached to it because that snake wants that, right? And so again, water snakes can be a little bit more on the aggressive side, but in my experience, they really, again, they don't want anything to do with you. There's other fish in the sea literally for them. And so they can, you know, you can either just kind of take a stick and just kind of move it towards them. Don't hit the snake or make contact with it, but just that proximity will kind of scare them away. But oftentimes too, if you just hold them up and then just put them on that ground, that snake will probably take off pretty easy. So, but yeah, other than that, you know, they're really great too. I always tell people that snakes are kind of like your free neighborhood pest control team, because they'll eat, you know, the spiders and the mice and the crickets and grasshoppers and that you don't want around. And then yeah, they just ask that you don't kill them. So, but yeah, so hopefully I answered that question. Let me know if I didn't. Is there any other questions before I hop off?
Yeah, Tallon, I'd love to know maybe some of the interesting rescues that you have done, or what kind of that process is like for you and your team.
Yeah. So we really have we try to do the most we can with the resources we have. And that's kind of where that comes down to. We have, you know, every call is going to be different. You know, for example, this heron I'm going to go check on, I got a picture with it or of it. It sure is missing its upper half of its beak. But a lot of times they can learn to adapt. They can spear with the bottom side and then still get the fish thrown up and eaten. I picked up a heron the last year that was from Lee Martinez Park as well. That was wrapped in fishing line, and he had actually a pretty bad break in his wing. We see a lot of turtles with fishing hooks that they will either swallow. Geese will get lead poisoning from some of the fishing weights that are left around if they try to eat those. I've done a couple deer. Deer, again, you know, people like to personify animals a lot, but animals have, you know, the wildlife that's within our community have had relatively few generations to really keep up and try to adapt to all the human stuff that we've done. And bridges are a problem for deer because they don't understand the gravity aspect of it. And so they'll try to cross, because let's say, you know, maybe we built a bridge, which is great, but the bridge only is for the water, right? We didn't leave any land for that wildlife crossing. And so we'll see deer kind of try to come up and then get spooked by a car, and then they try to jump off of the bridge. A lot of time they're okay. I've had a couple deer that have fallen in the river and broken a leg or something. Again, like I said, there's been a couple recovery operations that we've done for deer that unfortunately have not survived that fall. So if you do come across that, just always kind of slow down, slow down and stop safely and put on your hazards and just kind of let that animal figure out the rest of its crossing. When you honk at them or try to rev your engine up on them, they tend to panic, just like we would if we were in the middle of a road. Beaver, I was just talking to the Fort Collins Natural Area Rangers. This is the time of year we're seeing an increased beaver activity. I personally, in 20 years, have never had anybody complain of a human wildlife conflict regarding a beaver. But they do enjoy chopping down trees. And so if your property is right up against a natural area or something where there's beavers, you might want to try to put like a little garden fencing around there. Because again, like they're just doing what they need to survive, right? They're not doing it maliciously or to try to damage anything that you're working on. But there is, the rodent or the rodent mammal repellents that you can also use there too. I did have one beaver that was injured that I helped take care of at a facility I worked at before I found a NOCO. And it came from Left Hand Canyon in Boulder, so it wasn't the Poudre River. But he actually had fallen over a waterfall and cracked his head open on a rock at the bottom of it. So he had kind of scalped himself too. So he had some head trauma, and of course needed some time to just let that wound granulate in and heal. Again, that about 90% of the cases I see are human-caused injuries to these animals or human-caused orphanings to these animals. That is one of them that's not, though. And so that was kind of an interesting one, right? We don't think of animals falling over waterfalls, let alone beavers. You think they know better. But accidents happen. We all get into trouble somehow. And so, we really just want to make sure that we are providing these animals with somewhere to go. And hopefully that's with our future expansion too. We can provide even more services to these animals, along with, advanced internships and daily and volunteering opportunities and, indoor and outdoor classrooms and stuff. But regardless, we want these animals, we have hospitals for when we get hurt. We have vet clinics for pets when they get hurt. There's really no reason that wildlife shouldn't have somewhere to go when they get hurt. And so, that's kind of where we come in and the niche we're trying to fill. I'm really happy that we filled the niche for reptiles and amphibians, but there's still work to do. But that's kind of the general injuries and some of the stuff we see along river corridors. Goslings. So, geese are having babies right now. All waterfowl are, most animals are. And we just did that. This morning was our first call for orphan geese. Somebody's dog attacked and killed the mom. And so we had 2 babies that were needing somewhere to go. And geese are one of the few species that will actually foster orphans from another family. And so we can reunite them with another goose family. And sometimes we can do that along the river too, because that makes really nice habitats. And again, if we can work with the natural areas too to get permission to do that there, they have a little bit more protection. There's a little bit less human activity going on, less littering, and generally speaking, the people that are in recreating and enjoying a natural area is there to also respect it. And so they can be set up for a little bit more success there versus if I try to reunite them with a family at City Park or Rollinmore Park or something like that, right? So it is very vital that we protect this river corridor, throughout all these different ecosystems and habitats, because like we talked about, each niche, it kind of follows a different area of the river, and each species is going to fill each niche. And if you start removing those and unplugging them, then things start to spiral, and the balance of the ecosystem can really get to a detrimental point where you're sometimes maybe even seeing an entire species become extinct from that area. So it is important, like I said, it's great if you want to go above and beyond and organize a whole neighborhood cleanup or really put on educational classes or advocacy projects for this stuff. But a lot of it comes down to just being conscientious about your actions and not littering and not crashing your car into the river, or doing things that seem simple, but can really have a life-saving impact on our community's wildlife. Um, so, again, we're always here if you want to reach out with questions, or even from this presentation, or if you do find an animal that's injured, feel free to reach out. A lot of other organizations will kind of take this, let nature take its course. We're kind of trying to shift that paradigm because, like I said, 90% of these animals are injured, not because of nature, but because of humans. And so, we can all really do our part to be part of the solution rather than the problem. So, but we're always here. We're not going anywhere. We don't charge for any rescues or education programs or anything like that. So feel free to shoot us a Facebook message or shoot me an email with your request or your question, and I promise I'll get back to you as soon as I can in between chasing animals that need help. So, but I do really appreciate you guys being here. I really do appreciate Poudre River Fest inviting us back for this hybrid year. I'm sure if we're here next year too, that it'll be even better, even bigger, and then we can even bring some of our ambassador animals for you guys to enjoy. So, but
Well,
all for the future.
Yeah, we look forward to
Yeah.
that, Tallon. Thank you so much for all of that information. I think the takeaways I have are really to be more conscious of when you're in nature and making sure we're not leaving anything behind that could, be a detriment to the wildlife. And then just being really conscious and aware of your surroundings as you're in and around wildlife and enjoying their habitat, right? It's really their home, and we are their guests. So I like to kind of take that mindset and make sure that I'm doing my part. So Tallon, feel free to drop your contact information in the chat if you would like, or the link for folks to reach out. I think it's an amazing resource to be able to know you can call on a group that will come and take care of animals if they are injured or hurt and you just happen to see them. Thank you everyone for being here today. We have one more live workshop coming up right after this. If you did not register for that, I'm going to actually put the Zoom link in the chat. The presentation is from the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies, and then the presentation is on citizen science conservation along the Poudre River urban corridor. So Tallon, again, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I can't wait to have a big celebration and maybe get over my fear of snakes and see them in person with your help and guidance.
Anytime. All right. You guys all have a good day.
Thanks all.